Hello and welcome to the Beginner's Handbook. I'm Jordan.
I'm Jamie.
And in this episode we are going to be talking about getting into character in your tabletop RPGs. We've got a whole bunch of different games we could talk about, but I think we'll probably be focusing on D&D.
Yeah, more than likely we will be. Again, most of the episodes that we'll end up putting up will be kind of primarily talking about D&D. There will be drifting into things that are going to apply for different systems or other games or whatever, but more than likely we'll be talking about it from our experience playing that, but again we might drift on to other things where it's happened as well.
Yeah, so I think even before we start, I wonder, we usually open with a question. I think this time what we'll probably ask everybody is, for those who actually know what we're talking about, and we'll define it in a minute, but for those who know what we're talking about, how do you actually get into character when you play a game? We spoke about heavy roleplay themed games, and it might tie into how do you get into your roleplay, because obviously you'll get into character when you're roleplaying. But how is it you do it? What's your tricks or tips, if you have any, as a player? Or even if you're a GM, you might have tips on kind of keeping your own NPCs in your head, and especially recurring ones, about how you track them and play them at the table to make it clear to your players who they're speaking to. I definitely know what that's like when you've got 2 or 3 different NPCs at the table and they might all have the same voice, and it's going okay without going like Jordan said and Jamie said. You might instead do a voice or whatever it is you might do to try and distinguish them.
Yeah, and as well as that, if you do like getting into character, do you find it difficult or do you find it relatively easy, somewhere in the middle? We'd like to kind of hear what everybody's sort of what everybody's take in that is as well, whether it's something that they struggle with or not.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so, and for those who have no idea what we're talking about, especially if you don't really play role-playing games or you're new to it and you've just came across this somehow, what does it we actually mean by getting into character? Because we're not kind of specifically talking about like sticking to roleplay like constantly, but particularly we're just talking about how do you get yourself in the headspace. When I say getting into character, it's about how you get yourself in the headspace of that player, of that character, which would be how you can then roleplay effectively with them. I don't know if there's another way that you would describe it.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the way I would describe it. Basically, getting yourself to the point that you are thinking like the character that you're playing and you are making decisions based on, like, if that character was a real person and in the room in front of you in that situation that you're playing through, what would they do? And getting yourself to the point that you're able to do that without having to kind of really sit and think and take up a lot of time doing that, or anything like that. It's been able to kind of differentiate between what you would do and what they would do.
Yeah, because I think that's actually quite a good, even just if you know how to get into character, it can really just help. Even just thinking in that headspace is really good for when you're role playing. There's a lot of games, even now, as many games as I've played and ran, it's just, if you're not gelling with a character, it can sometimes just be hard just to get in. Like, it's hard to role play because you're not in their headspace. So it's a cool thing just to figure out when you do it. So I think probably the first thing we'll maybe talk about then is, and maybe if you get some examples first, is how do you actually like seek inspiration for your characters and getting into them? Do you have any kind of main things that you do?
Me personally, what I normally, it depends on what kind of game that we're doing. I'll hold my hands up if it's a one shot or if it's something that's a bit more light-hearted or anything in that kind of realm. I'll put less emphasis on doing that because I know it's over a short period. We might not return to doing this, and primarily the purpose of the game is to either have fun or kind of give yourself a break from the kind of main game that you've been playing or whatever it is. So I'll put less focus on it, whereas if it's something that we know is going to be longer term or slightly more serious, then that's the point where I'll put more emphasis onto that. So 9 times out of 10, what I'll do is I will use like film or TV, something in that ballpark to kind of roughly match up to what I'm planning and doing. Now, I don't mean that whatever it is that I've watched that I'm using as that kind of launch pad from, that I just blanket copy whoever it is. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just using that as a kind of a sort of visual check as to what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, and what I'm going to try to do. And the reason that I do that is because at the end of the day, if something's managed to make it to TV, or if it's something that's managed to make it into a movie, then chances are, it's relatively well written, it's kind of put together, there isn't too many kind of glaring issues with it, like, a lion tamer that's allergic to cats or anything like that, like something that you just look at and go, that's just stupid, what is the point of that? So using that as a sort of like check and balance for it. And then if you get something that either is similar to, or you take that from your point to then go in a different direction with, then in theory it should be relatively well put together.
Yeah, so because that's one of the things I think, even forgetting the getting into character, some of the stuff you've mentioned there is actually finding the inspiration for one in the first place, because there's a lot of people that will struggle with that. I'm somebody that does that. I'll get into some of the stuff that I do later on, but spoiler, it's not that much actually for the most part, but certainly there's loads of ways people can find that inspiration. You've mentioned film and TV, although you say sometimes it must be decent if it's in film and TV. I don't know if you've seen the films that I watch. Most of them are crap, but joking aside, I mean, film and TV is one example, and I've seen plenty of times at a table where people are emulating movie characters or TV characters. One of mine was based on Jack Sparrow, which was a swashbuckling rogue. So I picked that with the idea of going someone that was like a pirate and things like that. So it's a really easy way, probably one of the most accessible ways to actually lift a character idea into a game. But it's not just strictly linked, like inspiration doesn't have to come from TV or film. It could be books if you're looking at books or something, but maybe something a bit more abstract. It might help even just get into a setting, which I certainly done this when we did the Warhammer series. But things like music could be a way as well to get into a kind of world that I play. I think I've mentioned this in a couple episodes, a game called Morkborg, which is a Swedish kind of, it's described as like a death metal kind of fantasy RPG, but there's a band I listen to called Necrogoblicon, which is like, it's got to be like the soundtrack to this game, because it's like death metal, it's super brutal, it's about goblins eating people. So I'm going, this is perfect for the vibe of Morkborg. So sometimes I'll use like some of my baddies have been based on some of the music videos, like John Goblicon, who's like the pipe man of the band. So I've used that kind of idea and used that for NPCs when I've ran games, for example. Is there any others that you can think of?
Well, again, music's another one, and again, like, although we're talking about, or we've talked about so far using like film, TV, music as the starting point for how your character behaves and all that sort of thing, you can also use it in reverse. So if you've came up with a character, and again, like John was saying, that it's a kind of Jack Sparrow-esque character, imagining them, once you've realised that that's who they're like, imagining them in the films. Well, how would they interact with the different characters there? Would they fit into that world? Yes or no? And again, music, you come up with whatever your idea for your character is. Somebody in, again, like the Morkborg world. Would they go and would they listen to that band? Would they listen to that album start to finish and enjoy it? Yes or no? And depending on what answer you get, would possibly steer you whether your character's in the right direction or whether you're miles off. But another thing, other visual things like pictures, photography, art, paintings, that kind of thing. So it, just off the top of my head, if like whatever game that you're in, if it's in a sort of Renaissance type setting, then, you know, like with artwork and things, could you see them as one of the like being one of the subjects in a painting, or have you seen a painting somewhere that has somebody that you go, you know, that's a kind of interesting look, you know, whatever, can you take that and then develop something from that?
Yeah, I think because this is all stuff like this is even before you're getting into your character's headspace. Like this could be character inspirations that you can start delving into when you look more into some of these mediums that we're speaking about. Because certainly I've listened to songs. I don't really do this a lot, but I can certainly think of at least an instance or two where I've heard a song and it's like whatever the lyrics that I like, kind of power metal as well and stuff. So a lot of the time these are fantasy kind of themes going on in these bands, or sci-fi themes, and it's like the start to the end's like this whole big epic fantasy space opera or something. So you might be pulling wee ideas and going, oh, I could take a bit of that here or a bit of that there. And there's things I've read in books where I've thought that would be such a cool warlock character in D&D, like something with all this dark secret stuff. So these are plenty of great ways to do it. But another one, and this is probably something, it's probably since 2020, more so, but I think even maybe a bit before that, is I've seen people that have based or created characters off of actual play videos that are on like YouTube or something. So whether, you know, obviously the big ones like Critical Role, but there's a whole range of really great actual play channels out there. And I've seen people lift stuff from these other games these online actual plays, and have used that as a basis for a character. And in some cases I've seen people just totally lift the idea and use it, but it's still a total viable way to get inspiration and get your building blocks or foundation for a character. So I think that's definitely some of the ways that I can think of that it's about seeking inspiration for building a character and starting to get the elements for how you might get into their headspace.
Yeah, and something that's just kind of popped into my head there, and I think we maybe touched on it in the episode we done about role playing, when we talked about role play heavy games and things like that, is like your particular area's local history and history as well, so historical characters or events and so on. And again, just that same kind of things. If it's a historical event that interests you for taking a character forward, again, ask yourself, would they have fitted in to whatever was going on, whether it was a battle, whether it was like the plague in London or whatever, you know, would they fit in that world? If they were in that world, how would they cope with it? How would that affect them? And, you know, take that forward. Or if you're basing it on some historical figure, then ask yourself, well, why did they become a historical figure? Is it because of what they've done, or is it because of who they are? And figure out which one of the two they are, and then work with that.
Yeah, because I mean that's even something that, even forgetting games for a second, you see that across media like all the time. Like, I mean, this is more a game setting, but I mean the Bloodborne games obviously heavily influenced in like cosmic horror. There's a lot of Lovecraftian stuff in there. But even looking at things like George R. Martin, who did the Game of Thrones series, you've got the Red Wedding, which is based off of some Scottish history thing. I think a lot of it's based on European history, but I can't remember what exactly it was.
I think a lot of it's kind of nicked from us, because I can't remember Westeros. If you look at that, there's an area like in the kind of west coast into the Western Isles somewhere that is, it's basically the same name with like a vowel removed. You're like, alright, okay.
So I mean, even things like that, which is huge fantasy stuff that's going on, that's became TV shows and all sorts, and even now the House of the Dragon stuff. But that's based off of history as well, and it can be a great way to actually get characters done as well. I know people that have played video games. I'm just thinking about Morgan and stuff. So it's based off of like an actual video game character but modified. So we're not saying like it's always about lifting and shifting the ideas when you're taking it from other media either. A lot of the time it becomes like the basis or almost like the entry point for this character that then opens up as you start to customise it to your heart's content. So
and I have blanket lifted from a TV show before, and
How dare you?
It was basically name change due to legal reasons. Was essentially what was going on. I literally didn't change too much. That was partly to see if I could get it through the censorship that the DM was putting us under at the time. So I did sneak that in just to see.
Who was it?
The Duke.
Oh, I don't even know. Was that supposed to be Thingy from
Parks and Rec?
Aye. I know you had the picture, but of Ron Swanson in Parks and Rec.
The Duke? Duke Silver, sorry.
Aye, that's right. But
and you can see that's how creative I was.
Of course, I never even picked up I didn't even pick that up. I just, I get it now. I see at the time I didn't even realise, and I've watched that show a lot. But so that's sort of like the think of that like the seed for a character. That's like where you can get some of your inspiration. But let's say you've actually made something now, and you're taking it from there. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you could be doing. So it might be how you now. Let's say you've made a wee character, right, and you've based it off of someone. Let's say you've rolled the stats or whatever it is, and now it's your time to play them. There's a whole bunch of stuff that can happen, but I think some of the things I've seen people get hung up on a lot is actually the voice. Have you got any comments on voice of characters and things like that?
A voice isn't a character. Just remember
What?
that.
What?
Aye. Well, the thing is, like, a lot of the time I will do a voice for the characters. Partly because, like, when you're trying to be the character and when you're asking a question yourself, changing your voice, even if it's ever so slight, it is amazing. Even if it's just the DM or other players picking up on that subconsciously, how it can speed up the game, because they know when it's your character trying to interact with another character, or they know when it's you going, right, I need clarification for this, or you're letting somebody mechanically know what you're doing if you're trying to purchase something, or you know, whatever the case might be. But I don't know how other people view it, but just changing your voice, whether it's through accent or pitch or rhythm of speech, or you know, whatever it is that you're doing, that's not a character. You know, it's just one shard of what is going to make up the complete picture. So, like, although we've talked about like music and things and talked about it very briefly, like, if you can figure out what kind of music they would listen to, if you can figure out what, like, a play, for example, if it was on, would they watch that particular play that's happening in front of them? Would they find it boring? Would they find it riveting? You know, if you can ask yourself all those little questions, and if you can try and make decisions based on all those individual things, then you've got a character there that's complete. You've got something. Whereas just changing your voice, that's all you've done. It's, you know, it's still you that's there making those decisions. And when you've got, again, when you've got shows there that are, if you've got somebody there that's doing voices and it's well produced, and you know, it's got a lot of positive things there, I think people can fall in the trap of, again, doing the superficial and then thinking that that's them at the end goal. Now, if this is the first time that you've ever done something like an RPG, and that's your first step, then fair enough, that's you starting a process, and you know that you're going to develop and add to it over time, and you're going to get that kind of acting skill, if you like, and you're going to get that improved, and you're going to keep working on it, and you're going to gradually make more and more complex characters, and rather than the character being complex, that you've just got more more background information on them, if you like, then that's fine, that's great. But if you're at the point where you're doing that level and you think that you've got the complete character, then I think you're in trouble.
It's interesting. I find voices a funny one, because I kind of see them as a good way to kind of get a vibe for someone. Like if you hear a wee creature voice or something, or whatever, I think they're kind of good kind of starting points. I think for me the main thing about the voices, because they can certainly be a good way to round off characters, and I'll come into why I think they're particularly. I'll use them for getting into character when I'm running games, but I'll explain that later. That's when I do voices. But like me, like I know a lot of people who might not be interested. Like they've never done an RPG, so if they come to a game and everybody's doing voices, they go, "Oh my god, this looks like too much work," or "It looks too intense," or whatever it is. It's maybe too much for them, and that's okay. But I'm actually somebody that doesn't tend to do, when I'm playing at least, I don't tend to do a lot of voices. I have done them in groups where, especially one of the groups that I introduced to D&D, and I think when one of the other guys ran a game, everybody was doing voices, and I was like, wait, I'm not the one not doing a voice now. And that was the first time I realised, like, right, I'll put effort into trying it out, and it was dead fun. You know, it really helped me just like zone into character. It's almost like anchoring, where it's like, okay, if you've done the voice a lot and then you do the voice, it might help you slip in. But the thing about voices is, if you don't do them, that's okay, like, because that's not a voice isn't the character's identity. You know, it's really all the other stuff that you bring into that character. So, you know, I think the dwarf barbarian guy I've got, like, he doesn't have a voice, you know, well, sometimes I might slow it down or maybe try and do it a bit deeper, but it's really not like, it's not voice acting at all by any means. So, because it's not that I'm not maybe 100% comfortable, I guess, with it, but I'm doing it, I'm not bothered with doing it. I'm happy doing terrible accents and getting slagged for it. It doesn't bother me, you know. But it just doesn't do a lot for me in most cases. The real, so that's, for me, the voice isn't like you don't have to get it done, but if you like doing them, you might, if you're the sort of person that practices voices in your house for characters, then go ahead, because that can help you get into the character. But for me, because I don't do them a lot, and it's purely just effort, to be honest, it's just can't be bothered. I might start it and then I end up stop doing it, so in that case, what's the point? I can't really be bothered. You've pulled out a lot of voices recently, which I totally forgot about when we kickstarted the dwarf stuff. I was like, I don't remember this guy. I forgot we even had that guy that you've been playing recently.
Yeah.
I just had the other guy in my head the whole time, the Duke. So it's just funny. But anyway, my whole point is, like, certainly use that as a means to slip into character and things. But certainly when it comes to, especially when you're trying to role play it, voices can help you get into it. But if you know and can actually sit and see how your character might be in the context of everything, then you'll probably find role play much easier too. And if you're somebody like me that doesn't tend to do voices for their own, like, their playable characters in games, at least when I do play, you know, don't worry about not having a voice. And if people slag you off for it, then, you know, that's fine. They should have better things to do with their characters, but to be honest, you probably won't come across that a lot. I'd be surprised. I don't think I've had, other than a couple of times, I've not had people slag me off for not doing a voice. I think I've had people express disappointment a couple of times, but I've just went, look, I don't care. This is how I want to do my guy, and it's fun. So
yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you, like, out of like different aspects of a character, if you asked me to pick what I thought was the least important part of coming up with a character, 100% would say voice, and I'd have that at the bottom of the list.
See, I don't know what my list is though.
Well,
I'll explain that later, because I don't have a list.
and again, realistically, I don't really know what my list is either, because I've not thought about it. But, like, if I was talking about it you just now, I'd go, right, okay, well, are they introverted or extroverted? Like, that is miles higher up on my list to know what the character's like than do they have an accent. So that's what I mean. It's that's when you're getting to the finer detail. That's when you're getting to adding in, like, the light and shade to the picture, rather than, like, actually sketching in the outline of trees and stuff. That's what I mean. And the voice is fine detail rather than knowing whether they're introverted or extroverted is a building block.
I kind of see it a wee bit different, but I think that's something I'll talk about a bit later on about how I do stuff, because I almost see like the external being like the broad strokes, so actually not so much the detail, and then I kind of work back from there. But that's most of the time. Like I work a lot, and I'm pretty busy. I'm busy like every weeknight, and I'm busy most nights, so working full time. I've got a whole bunch of other commitments I do. I don't tend to have a lot of time to actually formulate characters, so I tend to do that in games and stuff. So that's where I might have some of these other things up front and centre. But I suppose then the thing is, but that doesn't mean that, you know, this is the way you should be doing it. I think it depends on what you kind of get out of making characters. I don't get a lot out of sitting building and writing tons of backstory. I don't really have a lot of time to do it most of the time, and when I do it, I normally get GMs going, so here's 20 questions about how this fits in my world, and I'm like, oh god, this is becoming work. You know, so that's quite interesting, because I don't disagree with you either. It's just it's just a different approach, I suppose.
But again, that's what I'm meaning as well. Like, so you using a voice as a starting point. So, like, I'm trying to think of one of the characters I've done in the past. But like a generic posh voice.
I give us it.
No.
He's not role playing, so
funnily enough, I think we'll end up talking about that in a little minute. Okay. But like if you've got a general kind of posh voice there, you might use that as a starting point. Like if you're doing it because you've, I don't know, seen whatever news story about some posh person that you don't particularly like or whatever, and you're using the voice as a way of kind of mocking them, like to friends or whatever, then that might give you the starting point to have a character who's upper class, who's arrogant, who's you know, treats people horrendously, who you know, that might be your start point, and fine, great, fair enough, but don't make it your end point. And ultimately the voice isn't the thing that is going to make the character make decisions. It's just the voice, it's just how they speak, which is why I'm saying that's the fine detail part. Whereas knowing that they treat anybody below them with, you know, disdain and blah 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 blah, that's all the important stuff, because that's how you then know how they'll make decisions. The voice isn't going to give you any clues as to how they make decisions. It's just your interpretation of the voice that's giving you that launchpad. Yes,
because I still, even with that, see the voice as it, rather than it being a fine detail, I see the fine detail being that stuff about their personality, but that being more important for knowing how to play them. But I think, do you know what, let's move into how we normally do it then, actually. I think because I can pull in some of this then, like, so for me, like, I'd say like it's not even really it's a big detail. The voice is kind of like I just see that being like if you had the different paintbrushes and one was just a big dabber, you know, that's kind of how I see a voice. And now you might refine it, change it, or stop using it, and it won't change the character. But your stuff that you're talking about there, about the kind of their, what would you call that? The kind of their philosophy on things, you know, and how they might treat lower class. But if it's like some noble elf, how they might treat people lower than them. That's kind of really getting into really strong tools to pull on when you're getting into character, and when you're role playing specifically, it's really good for that sort of stuff. But especially for me, then I spoke about how I'm busy, and a lot of the time I don't have time to make characters. Even games, most of the time I speed read a lot, so I'll speed read through stuff, and when I'm prepping for a game, I tend to have like less than an hour to actually set up the place for having people and prepping a game. Even the games that I run campaigns for, so that would be Curse of Strahd or things like that. So I don't have a lot of time. But what happened with me with voices, because I don't tend to do them, like it said, but I started running games, and then I found when there was multiple NPCs and sometimes people wouldn't show up, so I'd be playing their character, and somebody that was missing, I'd play their character, and then some of my guys, and I found it was getting confusing. So I'd started doing voices almost out of necessity to make the games a wee bit smoother, because I felt like people go, wait, who's saying that now? Who's saying that? So I started doing voices, very bad ones, but I was doing them to just make a distinction. But when I started doing that for playing characters, like a lot of the time, as you'll know, even the guy that we did for your Templar stuff, although we did talk about it, but I kind of came in with like a very vague idea, and it wasn't until through talking it with you we could start to connect all that up. And if I had did I have a voice for him? I don't think I did. Or I might have tried when I lost it throughout, because I just not bored doing it, just maybe forgot about it.
I don't think you did, and I was kind of.
I think I added a few.
I was slightly surprised because funnily enough, the Warhammer game, you pulled out a voice that I thought was why you picked that area for him to be from.
I think so. I can't even remember.
That's what I was thinking. And then there wasn't that voice and accent.
And you're like, you're out. But
blasphemer.
It's one of these things, because I've definitely noticed this, and it's been a more recent thing I've noticed that I've done for a while, where when I'm running games, I get. So we're talking about getting into character. You could definitely do this as a GM, and I do that when I'm doing a GM, because just for those, I've done the Wrath and Glory campaign with Jamie and the guys, and we done the Graveyard Shift, and there's a guy called Diomedes in it, and he's supposed to be some kind of gruesome, just kind of peddler and kind of sleazy businessman type affair. So clearly I wanted to do some English accent for it, and he also has terrible teeth, so it fits in with everywhere that we live here. So I just thought it was a good way to get into it.
50% of the UK audience gone.
Yeah, well, I mean, my teeth aren't great either, so I'm with you. Next week it will only be me here. I'll be gone too because of that statement. I'll cancel myself.
Due to overt racism.
Yeah.
This is now a solo project.
At least I never said who. I just said we here, so who knows who that means. But anyway, joking aside, it's so with voices, when I have done them for characters, a lot of the time I don't have, and this is what I think is interesting, because having the details is really good for getting into character, but a lot of the time I don't really have a character to get into when I start, so I kind of approach it differently, mostly just because I've got quite a hectic schedule. But to give you a big example, the dwarf guy that I play, in our big long form game that we've spoke about plenty of times, he started out as, if not just about entirely as a random generated character. I just went, I don't know what to play, click, and it just made this character for me. It ended up being Barbarian, it ended up being Totem Warrior. I think I might have rolled the stats though, because I think we had to do it online or something, I can't remember. But if I didn't,
there's scrutiny involved.
yeah. So I just rolled the stats, and I made the second name and went, whew, that was hard work. But I didn't really know how to play him. I just looked at the stats I ended up with, which was like -3 intelligence modifier, and I went, alright. And so a lot of the time when I'm doing characters, a random generating's totally viable way to get a seed for a character, by the way. I'm maybe saying that because I do that all the time. But
no, I mean, I would agree with you, and again, as long as again, depends on what random generator you're using. You might use one that generates character traits for you, or you might use one that's just purely doing stats. But if it's one that's giving you the character traits, then that's your template to work with and think about what it means.
Cool. Yeah.
But if it's one that's just generating the stats, then you need to do a little bit more kind of thinking there and go, right, well, it's somebody that has, +5 in wisdom but -3 to intelligence, so what does that mean? Well, can't write their own name, but they've got great life advice. They can interpret nature well, they can work out what it means, and then figure out who that person is from that, and then just develop it and take it forward. So again, totally fine as a launch point.
Yeah, that it makes, because that's really what I do with a lot of my characters. I'm getting really big back into the OSR, OSR's old school Renaissance style games. I mentioned Morkborg, very much OSR, rules light. It's kind of more narrative than it is like rules heavy. So a lot of that is, I think because I play a lot of games that are hardcore, like D&D is one of the. It's not the game, I think it probably is about the game I played just about the most, but it's on par with a bunch of other systems, but at least another one. But most other games that I do play, if I'm not doing D&D, you die pretty quick. So a lot of the time you might be switching the characters out every game or so. So I think that's where my kind of approach tends to be. I might, if I'm not sure, I might random generate if I need one on the fly, and then I'll pick if it gives you seeds for their backstory or whatever. I might use that as a basis and make up a wee funny voice if I want. They'll just see how I feel. Because I think with the Templar stuff, I might have done a voice at one point and I forgot about it. I vaguely remember going, I'm going to do one, and I didn't, I think. But so I kind of work backwards like that. I start with the big voice and then look at the detail based on what I know about the world, because a lot of the time I'm playing in other people's custom homebrew games, which, you know, then it comes with all the other stuff, like it needs to meet certain criteria. And there's been a lot of times, and I know some GMs won't like it, but I'll just be like, this is my vague character. What is it that makes this work with your setting? Because a lot of the time I'll sit and answer all the questions of a GM, and then I'll be given another 10, and I'm just going, I don't have time to go back and forward. So I tend to retroactively build my... It does take me a few games to get into character though because of that. I don't have one ready for a game. If my dwarf guy dies, I'll make a new character and I'll have no idea how he's supposed to fit in for a few games. Hopefully GM's okay with that, but I'm sure he'll make exceptions if I make any mistakes and want to change it later down the line. But I think that's just about me. Most of the time I'm retroactively building it, so I'll start with like the superficial and I'll figure out the details. And I think with our Templar stuff, it was a case where, and I do this anyway, I'll chat to the GM separate before or after a game, or maybe even during if there's a break, and ask them about stuff. And we did that with my guy, and we ended up making a whole bunch of cool stuff, which I would never have thought of doing, you know. So I just prefer doing it as a more organic experience, and maybe it's just the time to do it on my own. I just can't be bothered a lot of the time, but that's how I do it.
And again, for me, coming up with a character, it can vary with what I do. Sometimes it will be, again, it will start from a voice and then going, because you're doing a voice again, whether it's to do an impression of somebody or whatever, that you then go, well, you've got your kind of perception of who would fit that voice, so then taking that and then try to develop that and seeing how it would fit into a game, whether it's you, again, like you see something on a character in a show or whatever and you go, that's quite interesting, and then you take that and develop it. So I don't ever have a kind of a set way that I would start developing something, and again, sometimes it's just the sort of like the particular game that you're supposed to be playing the next week sort of thrusts a set of conditions towards you, and you just kind of work with that. You work with what you're getting back from the DM, and then you go, right, well, if we're going to be in like a sci-fi setting and this and that, then, you know, what would I want to do? And again, that's the other thing as well. What do you want to play? You know, do you want to play somebody that's an extrovert? Then, okay, well, probably you should make a character that's an extrovert then and work from that, rather than going, I bet I've seen this and it's the broody, introverted type that, you know, it's dead cool on TV. Sure, great, but if you then start playing it and you want to be the first guy kicking in the door and being heroic, it's probably not going to be what you're going to be doing, and you're probably not going to be enjoying yourself that much. So, you know, figure out what you want to play as well and take it from there.
I think that's a good point, because like Warhammer for yourself, like not really done Warhammer stuff, so those games that we done, I mean, I could have sat, but I'm not somebody that likes, I knew it wasn't going to be that long, so I don't want to sit and basically dump every single person in the group. Don't really have the time to do it, and I'm not doing it at the table because that'll take way too long and burn up everybody else's time. But I mean, it took a couple of games, but you were right in doing stuff, and you picked up the Warhammer stuff pretty quick, considering how much I was trying to give as much as I could at the table without it just being 10 minutes of trying to explain what a cherub is. But but it's one of the things. No, but this kind of moves into like, actually it's showtime. So maybe let's move on to that, because I like what you're saying about picking something you'd like to play.
Well, that's what I done with the Warhammer game. It was literally just looking through the book, looking at different classes, at different characters, not characters, sorry, the different classes that were there, and going, does that seem interesting? Yes, no. Would I actually want to play this? Yes, no. And as soon as I got two yeses, narrowed my list down, and then I just went through and then picked what I picked. And then from that point I went, right, reading the description, right, okay, can I exaggerate this part of it? Would I underplay this? And then I just kind of worked from that description out and just slowly kind of built it up from there.
Yeah, it's kind of like you had your mould and then just started to play with the bits, the kind of ingredients. And that's something that, and for you, like that, it's harder to get into a game you don't know a lot about. And because I play a run, it's about 3 to 5 games a week, so it's a lot of games. It's actually way too many games. But I do a lot a week, basically, is what I'm saying. So I've had GMs that want me to know all their lore. And I've been quite honest to say, I am not going to remember your stuff. Like, I'll take notes and I'll do my best, but I play way too many games to actually be basically draining that in. And I think that's why I tend to start with like a vague kind of... I can't really get too into them at first because I don't know what they are until I do a bit of playing. But certainly if you know the source material, let's say it's Warhammer and you're playing Warhammer RPG, one of the like 3 there is, or 4, or whatever it is, you'll be able to get into that a lot easier. If you're super into high fantasy, you'll be dead easy getting into D&D or Pathfinder. But if you don't like horror and you play Call of Cthulhu, it might be hard to get into that character. So it's worth just having a think, like, what do you like to play, what themes do you like to play, and when you know what game system you're playing, what class would you be interested in playing? Because at least it'll be easier to slide into that. When I started playing a barbarian, I found it quite hard because I'd played kind of half caster, half melee guys before then. Never played an entire melee based class. So I found that a bit hard to get into at first because I didn't find the whole big dumb as a rock kind of archetype that interesting to play. It was fun for like a few games, but I just get bored of it super quick. But I think then that kind of takes us to, so we know, you've made a character, it's game night, and it's time to go. What's the sort of stuff you would kind of say to people about actually, now that it's showtime, how would you approach, like, right, it's time to play this character? Because I think we'll probably have a couple of, not like things we don't agree on, but I think there'll just be a couple of different approaches. I've covered probably most of mine already, but I think I'm kind of curious about yours.
So the first thing that I would say is have a plan or roadmap, whatever you want to call it, so that when you're there and when you're playing, you don't need to overly think and you don't need to overly try and recall what you've decided you want to do with the character. So whether that's literally like writing down whatever on a bit of paper or having it on a screen, or whether it's that you just before the game go, right, okay, well, introverted, struggles to remember people, like two or three kind of key points from it, and then going, right, okay, I've got that, right, okay, and I'll work with that and then see what happens during the game with a bit of flow, or whether you do it more rigid and you've got it written down, every single thing that you want to do. And the reason I would say that is so that when you're there and you're at the table, you've got a consistency with the character. So, again, going back to the introverted, extroverted thing, you're not get somebody that's jumping up on stage and, singing, dancing, performing, whatever, and then, 5 minutes later when it comes to talking to somebody in a room that they're too shy to do it. You've got that character sticking to what their personality type would be throughout it. But what it also does when you're there actually at the table, or whether it's online or whatever, is it takes a bit of the pressure off of you trying to be the character. Because if you ever find yourself getting a bit lost, just look down at the sheet, have a wee quick reminder of the different traits that you've got there, and then just carry on with that.
Yeah, it's interesting you said. There was one bit there, it just made me think, because I used to be a bit more not formal, what's the word, organised, and I think it was just running so many games I just lost a lot. Now part of the fun for me is exploring that it was consistency, but part of the fun for me was about exploring, kind of playing the game and trying to discover the character as I go. But consistencies, I've mentioned how I'll maybe not have as much detail, but I'll still play it. I don't really have a problem getting into a character so much now, even though I don't have all the details yet, but a lot of that is just me kind of putting out the kind of feelers and just to see what I'm enjoying and then building it from there. But my consistency is probably much less. Like even thinking of the Templar stuff that you were doing, I was very much going to be like super, I think because we came off the back of Warhammer, I was thinking of maybe going, maybe not too far this way, but like super like a big zealot, you know, for my religious reasons and all that. But as I started playing, I think I started being a bit more kind of like assertive. But as soon as I met one of the other characters, which I think was it was like the rogue guy, I can't remember what sort of class they were playing. But I ended up kind of deferring to kind of more like the bumbling, nervous kind of, because I was supposed to be a trainee for like the priests and all that in the Templar thing. James going to be like, you have no idea what you played, did you? But when I seen one of the other guys who was trying to assert himself as some leader character, I kind of went, do you know what, I'm gonna take my wee secret agendas and just hide them and bury them a bit and play, not like I want to surprise him with it, but more because it makes more sense for me to be some...
I like the idea that if they're watching this, you're just revealing you're revealing too much.
Well, I mean, by the time this goes out, probably, if something was going to happen, it probably has happened by now. But
hastily arranging a game for tomorrow,
just in case.
To make sure.
But it's one of these things where I thought, do you know what would be fun to play? Like a smart guy, like a good guy, but just really unsure of himself and kind of deferring to who he perceives as authority. Which naturally would just be the other players at the table and whoever, what seems like an important NPC. So, but actually that's the sort of route I've went down, because it fits, is way more neurotic than I would have wanted to play him. But it now makes sense with some of that narrative stuff we spoke about and how there's that kind of other stuff going on, and it makes sense for that kind of switching to happen. So yeah, but now I've got a really cool, especially because we spoke, like when it comes to showtime, if you're not sure about stuff, even the way I'm kind of would always say, just do it. It doesn't matter. Just try it out, and if you're not sure, speak to your GM and see what they think. That's what we did. And then I started playing the neurotic guy, and I went, I love this guy. I can't wait to see what happens, especially because of some of the other stuff that we've done with him. But so consistency is a big problem for me. Usually in the early days, but it took us one game. It was because we had a good idea what I wanted to do. What that we'd agreed on, but with the kind of, I mean, there was a wee bit of inconsistency with how he actually played in play, but it ended up, I've got a cool character. It's dead easy for me to slip into him now, because I just need to go, what do you want to do? I don't know what to do. And then people go, oh, okay, no problem. And then I go, oh, bad thing happened, and whatever, we'll find that out another time though. Maybe we'll talk about it.
Maybe.
But
and the other thing with that as well is, you know, D&D sheet and lots of other sheets that are out there, they've got the little boxes for you to fill in the different traits about the character. So, you know, they are there to help. So don't use it because it will help you in case you find yourself getting lost. But again, don't worry if you start to flex that a little bit and develop it over time, because it's either the character evolving or it's you figuring out exactly what you want to do, and it's taking it from a plan to properly in action and properly playing out.
Yeah, certainly one of the things that I'm sure, I mean, to be honest, I've just played so much, it's kind of second nature now, and it might not need to be said, but I mean, if you're doing, especially if you get a group of pals you really like don't worry about trying to get in. If you're doing voices, it's hard. I know it's easy to say don't worry, but see if you've made a character and you've played them a few weeks and you're not liking how they play and there's something else you want to try with it, just do it. Don't keep calm about it. Chill out. Just try it out, because it's better to find the character that you enjoy than it is to stick to one that you don't like. My dwarf guy became... It get branded. I did play him like that early on, the big dumb rock, and like I tried for so long over like a 2-year period to do art, kind of bit of arcs in there, and we'd had some stuff early on, but then he became the leader. But it felt like none of that was really, I either wasn't being clear enough, or it was just hard for other people to pick up on. That was trying to move away from that archetype, just because I just found it a bit boring I found it incredibly boring to play, especially after 2 years, just the same thing. It doesn't help that barbarians are pretty much, you do the same thing all the time with them in combat. But but recently we had this narrative thing come up, and I just went, do you know what? There was two things I wanted, and if you know Totem Warrior the bear, you know the only thing they're not resistant to is psychic. So I could have got resistance to psychic, or I could have revived an old dead friend, which I killed as an NPC. Oops. But then I went, you know what? This is probably the only time I'll be able to break this because I knew we had a break from that campaign and we're new back to it. But I was worried that if this was to go on for another year and I was still the same flaming guy, I'd be like, oh god. So I used that opportunity to switch it up a bit, but it gave it a narrative reason for me to have a new kind of almost like a new character to some degree. And I've actually found it easier to get into that character because I now don't need to worry so much about like, oh, would they actually think that? Because the guy can't even spell his own name, but now he knows how to spell his name. He's got better intelligence, so it was -3 and it's now like +7. So anyway, the details don't matter. It's happened. But is there any other things that you would say about like showtime? What would you do?
Well, after you've got your little prompts, which I would, again, especially if you're struggling to get into character, or if this is your kind of first sort of serious attempt at it, again, make sure you've got your little prompts there. And again, 3 bullet points, more than enough for getting started. Next thing that I would do is just before the game, just sit and literally just give yourself a pep talk. Just sit and go, right, might not work out, but you've tried, which is more than a lot of newer players will do. And just sit and think about that, and think about the fact that it's just a step. That's all you're taking. You're dipping your toe in the water, you're seeing what it's like, and then you're gonna hopefully do all right and take it forward. If you feel you need to do that, do that. Don't think that other people don't. Now, I don't quite go to that extreme now because I've done it often enough, but occasionally I still will if I'm not sure about a character, because occasionally I'll do things that I'm unsure of just to kind of try and push what I'm doing as a player so that I'm not doing the same things all the time, or so that my improvisation in a game is a bit better, or whatever the reason is. So I will still occasionally do that beforehand, and I'll go, right, okay, well, if you're trying to voice and you're really struggling for consistency, then don't worry about it. Do whatever you need to do beforehand. But again, just giving yourself a kind of motivational talk beforehand isn't necessarily a bad thing to do.
Yeah, I think for me, some of the big, I've kind of touched on some of the stuff that I talk about a lot, which is just about getting in and just doing it. So like, whether or not you're like, let's say you do some of the stuff Jamie's talked about where you've kind of prepped your idea, you've got all the kind of details that you want, and then you go to the game and now you're ready. Just go for it. It's just about trying it, double down on that, and actually just commit to that for the game and see how you feel. And if you don't like it, take wee notes just to refer back to, because maybe you'll realise when you're looking at the notes that you go, oh, do you know what, maybe I made the wrong choice, and that you're maybe figuring out how to play that character. But even if you use my approach, which is I've not really given it that much thought, I've got a sheet, I know I like this silly concept I've seen, so I'll just try it. Quite often I'm just about just jumping in neck deep and just seeing what sticks and what floats and what doesn't. And then I know for next time it's just about, I can come back to another game and just start to refine it. Because no matter how much planning you do, if you're a GM, you'll know this, doesn't matter how much you prep, there's going to be stuff people do that you did not expect them to do. And I think it's probably the same with actually running a character and actually getting into them. You'll find stuff that didn't really work the way you thought. Certainly the idea I had the initial when we did the Templar game, it was not really, there was very small slivers of that character in what the final product was.
Yeah.
But that's not a bad thing, it's just part of the process of making characters. And the more interested, like a big thing I would say is, the more interested you are in your character, the easier it will be to slip into them, because you know more about them. You know more about how they might act and play. And as long as you enjoy playing them, then it should normally be quite easy to slip in once you get past the recap. Anyway, I find recaps can be a bit like pulling teeth. Not I don't make players do recaps. I tend to just do it because half the time people don't remember. They're busy.
Yeah.
But after you get past that, you can just start to slip into character.
Yeah, and again, like with what you're saying there about like feeling out as you're going along, again, that's slightly touching more into the actual creation of the character than getting into character, because getting into character, you're kind of assuming that you've got your point that you're working with, and you know what you're trying to achieve and do. But if you're ever in a game and a question or a situation or whatever gets thrown to you, and you haven't thought about how they would react to it, how they would deal with it, just trust yourself, and whatever the first thing that pops into your head is probably going to be the right answer. So go with that, work with it, make a wee note of it, again, add it to that plan so you don't need to think about it later on. See how it goes, see how it feels, and if it's still sticking, if it's still there, then again, it's probably been the right choice to make, which again is pretty much what you do more than me, I think, but I'll still do that as well.
Yeah, it's funny because even if you have prepped your guy, I find a lot of the time, once I have an idea, because I think probably about a quarter of the way through your game, I was like, okay, I've got this guy solid, and halfway I was like, right, I know how I'm going to play him now, and by the end of it I was like, oh, different guy. It's like a new person. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's okay with it. It's just about going for it. That's really the big thing. Just go for what you think is going to work out, and if you need to change it or make tweaks, you can do that. The chances are people won't even notice anyway. I played a dwarf for 2 years and nobody had seen he was trying to do more than just hit things. So I mean, it's very easy for just things to, like, details to get lost in the ether. So it's worth just about iterating that character, even if you've got a clear idea and you're playing them in character. If you feel like your choices that you're doing, you might base it on your gut and then think back to it and go, I wasn't sure about that actually. Then just change it and try it out next time different, because it's not, you're never going to finish your character. I mean, part of the whole especially if it lasts long enough, your characters will develop over time into slightly different things that you play. So it's just about going with it. I think hard, like really hard and deep phrasing. It's about really just trying for it, going for it, double down on what you want to do, and just seeing what works and what doesn't. Just have fun. That's really it. I mean, most of our advice goes down to just have fun, but I think sometimes when you get in serious groups, that can be lost a bit in translation. So I think that's kind of, I've got a kind of wild card actually, but I'll come back to it, so just remind me if I don't say it. But that kind of leads on to, so I talked about my approach is almost more improvised, mostly because I'm busy. I keep saying that, but sometimes there's GMs I do know that they don't really understand what that means, because they might only work part-time and that's all, and then the rest of the time they're prepping games, and their heads in their world all the time, and if you don't know what god your guy worships or don't remember it, you get penalised. So it's like, it's way too much. Whereas, so someone like me can be quite hard for a GM like that, because I like to improvise more, especially if we're doing like one shots. Like, what's the point in even making what's the point in really putting a lot of detail in, especially if you're playing something like Morkborg, where you've got 2 hit points and you'll die if you take 3. Damage, that's 3 damage. So
just quickly, just while you're saying that, if you are the kind of person who likes that structure being there, likes notes and things, to work in your improvisation, to kind of push yourself in that other way, then one shots are a good place to do it, because if you put in the normal level of detail that you might put in for a long form campaign, like the one that we've been doing for the past
it might actually almost be 3
3 quarters. years,
Yeah.
in and about that sort of ballpark anyway, at this roughly this time of recording, then to do that in a one shot, like you're saying, you're probably not going to see half of that for the character. So if you've got something like that as a challenge, give yourself less. Start off, see how you develop it, see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, like, if you enjoy like making characters and trying them out and getting into character when you're not playing a game for a one shot, go ahead and do it, that's fine. But don't worry about it, is my main thing. And I've already told you, like, my kind of process is just basically winging it, actually. And then when I play the game, I just play what I think I should do. I don't tend to even have footnotes about what their traits are. I just go for it and see what sticks and what I enjoy about it. But I think the main thing as well, see if you actually try something, let's say you're in character and you try a couple things, let's say you're doing a voice, and see if you kind of chicken out of doing that. That's okay, just checking out of doing it, as long as you're, now that you've made the character and you're making decisions through them, and but their sort of, at least their basic beliefs are and opinions are, don't worry about some of the kind of cosmetic stuff, like the voices and dressing up, because we're not talking about dressing up, that's a whole different subject. It's more about just doing what you're comfortable with at first, and then you'll be able to explore, because if you're comfortable, you'll be able to be in character, whereas if you're not, you'll be taken out of it. So you're better just be doing your comfort zone, and then, like you're saying, it's like stretching some of those muscles, stretching some of that improv, and just seeing where it takes you, and you'll have a blast with it, because most people do. There's a lot of people I know that would never have touched RPGs until I ran a bunch for them, and now they're all buying handbooks and stuff. I've created monsters, I think, of about 10 people. But I think then there's one more thing I want to bring up, actually, and it's a wild card, and I was just thinking about it. We're talking about getting into character, and I'm aware that there's sometimes going to be players that will be totally new, and you might really not, like, you might find it all weird, you might not be into voices, you might not be into heavy role play, you might not be able, you might feel like you cannot get into character, even with the stuff we are talking about, you might not be able to get into character. But I would just say, if you're somebody that does feel like that, and it's mostly probably going to be a player that's like that, GMs might be like that too, but I would just say, if someone is like that at your table, let them be like that, and encourage them to do stuff, but just do it gently and see what happens, and just see what happens. But if you're someone that just is not comfortable getting into a character set, maybe it's because you don't know that, maybe you're not comfortable with it, and in that case it's just a case of just trying it in bits over time. But if it's maybe it's a rules thing you're not sure of, I would say if you're totally new, it's worth just starting with getting used to actually rolling dice and reading a sheet, because once you know that, and it's kind of committed to your memory, you'll be able to then start experimenting with the characters themselves. It was the same for me when we started playing D&D. I did a lot of Call of Cthulhu before then, but with D&D it was like a new system. I didn't probably really do a lot of in-character. I've made silly choices and I was running about and doing a wee bit of roleplay because I'd done it before, but I wasn't really getting into character that often. Like, it was in bursts here and there. I would never sustain a conversation with it. Even the Warhammer one we done with had that conversation with the archivist and the priest. That was like a wee 5-minute exchange, which I would never have done 2 years ago, not because I've been too uncomfortable, I just wouldn't have been able to get into character for that length of time and roleplay it. So, but if you are someone that's struggling with it, get comfortable with the rules first, unless you're happy just deferring that to a GM to tell you how to do it. But as long as you're comfortable just being at a table and playing, I think that's the first step for totally new people. And once you're comfortable, even if you don't really roleplay, and you prefer saying, I want to persuade them to do this, instead of role-playing what your character would say to persuade the merchant to give them a discount. As long as you're comfortable with the way other people are playing, they'll start to rub off on you probably. So I'd just say start there. It's just a bit of a side shoot, but it's maybe worth saying.
I would 100% agree with you. I think, again, we maybe talked about that when we were talking about like RP heavy games and things. We maybe mentioned that
it was probably
just
that side.
Getting used to the game and just worry about enjoying playing the game and forget about character, getting into character, just completely forget about it. So I would agree with you in that one, and I would call that step 0 rather than step 1.
Yeah, I can certainly see if somebody tells you to actually role play and not comfortable, just tell them to shove off. Who cares? Like, they're not the rules, well, unless they're the keeper or the GM, unless they're the GM. In which case, tell them to chill out. You know, you need to have fun too. You know, I've seen it at tables where people get slagged off for not doing stuff, and it's like, you shut it. You know, just let the guy do what they want to do.
Yeah, and again, that's the thing. We've talked about it in different episodes before as well. But if you ever feel like you are being pressured from a group to do, again, a voice, just for, because that seems to be the thing we're picking on over the last while, like if you're getting pressured into doing voices, or if when you then do a voice either under pressure or not under pressure, if you feel like rather than if the voice cracks halfway through and it drifts through 3 different continents before it comes back to the original voice that you were doing, and you feel that rather than like a kind of a joke where you're included, a joke where you're being laughed at and it's negative and starts to drift over a line, chances are it's not a group that you should be hanging about in for too long anyway, and that you should maybe think about switching up your group if you've not got that level of, and again, support maybe makes it seem a bit more dramatic than it is and should be, and that everybody's all emotionally very fragile.
Well, I've been in some groups that's been a bit like that.
Yeah, and again, emotionally fragile from the point of view, I'm not doing voices, they're not engaged with my game, they must hate me. No, it's just everybody's built the same as you.
We said we're picking on voices, but I mean, one thing I've seen where it's like, if you're not doing like in character like forgetting the voice, just even doing the in character conversation, like the actual role play aspect of it. I've seen people like, there's a guy I know and he's dead nice, but he'll say things like, right, role play, and it's like, they don't want to do it. Like, just chill out. Like, let them just say, I want to ask for this, or I ask you that. You know, just let them do it. So certainly, like, if you're in a position like that, which is probably more common than getting slagged off for the voice or not doing one, I mean, the thing is, maybe they just need to chill out a bit. Just do what you think feels comfortable, and if you keep getting accosted for it, it's worth saying to the GM, like, tell them to wrap it. I've had it before at tables in my own house, and it's with like friends, like between all the friends, but there's been new people that have joined when that's happened, and they've kind of been like, do advice, or like, do it, what are you asking me though in character, and or even if I'm playing with them, or sorry, I'm running the game and I'm asking them stuff like, what is it you're saying to the guy? If I see they're struggling with it, I'm just going to go, oh, well, you know, so what are you asking then? Rather than saying like, what are you saying, I'm saying like, so what are you trying to get out of it? What's the intent? And then I'll get it. So yeah, it's just worth saying though, just about the new player thing, just in case, because I've seen it a lot, not recently, but I've definitely seen it a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that kind of covers like getting into character. We've talked about a whole bunch of stuff, including what we do, what we mean by getting into character, some of the ways you could get inspiration for a wee character that can help. Like, you can use the seeds if it's movies or TV. You can use them to try out and get into your character with that, and even talked about the practical stuff at the table. So that's our take on it. We would love to know what you guys think. Do you have a method of doing it? I think my method's a bit more chaotic, because it's just like, just wing it and we'll see what happens. But then a lot of my games end up being like that. I think there was a game, was it we done? No, it was a different game. So we went off script, and they went, what? And I went, I've went off script, let's go. Whatever it was, like, I winged the whole game at one point, because they totally changed what they're doing. So my method's much more chaotic, I think. But how is it you do it? How do you get into character if you're comfortable, and if you're not, why is that? Is it something you're trying to do, or are you just not that interested, which is also possible and okay. But yeah, we want to hear from you and see what you guys think.
Yeah, and that's it. So you can do that if you're watching or listening to us on YouTube. There's comments underneath. There's Facebook. You could rattle something to us on Twitter, Instagram if you want to be different. Discord's kicking about there. There's a question usually on Spotify as well, and that's pretty much it.
Cool, well that's it from us, so I just want to say thanks for listening and or watching, and it's bye from me.
And bye from me as well.